Hello and welcome back to Hyperplay RPG. Today we're talking about handheld PCs, and in particular Ryzen 6800U handheld PCs. More powerful than the Steam Deck and better at emulation, particularly up to Xbox 360 and PS3, and now gloriously at the same price as a Steam Deck, from a certain point of view. We'll get to that. There's no shortage of options of 6800U handheld PCs. The Neo 2 released right at the end of 2022. And that's quite glorious, although we prefer the glacial white variation with its full glass frontage. A truly luxury and premium piece of kit. But that's not the only 6800U. Even released by Neo, they also did the Neo Air Plus. They did a 6800U variant of that. Then there's the 1X Player Mini, and added to that is the very interesting GPD Win 4, which comes with its own little keyboard as its USP. Now all of those options are more powerful than the Steam Deck, but of course the Steam Deck comes with its own advantages, which we'll get to later. And also there's another elephant in the room, the Asus ROG Ally, and we will definitely be covering that later in the video. So what's so great about these 6800U handheld PCs? Well, on screen here we have the Neo Geek, which is arguably the best of the bunch. Now this was released at the same time as the Neo 2, but was a slightly cheaper variant, which we'll see shortly, but also has a slightly better button layout, although sadly doesn't come in the glacial white variety unless you pay quite a bit extra. And the Neo Geek and all the other ones we showed you earlier in the 6800U category are particularly special because they can run PS3, as you can see on screen now, via the RPCS3 emulator, which has improved leaps and bounds in the last couple of months, as anyone who's been watching Mr. Sojano will know. But the Neo Geek and the other 6800U handheld PCs will also emulate Xbox 360 via the Xenia emulator absolutely flawlessly. Now for sure you can get something like Lost Odyssey to run on the Steam Deck through the Xenia emulator pretty well, but you're going to see much better performance on these 6800Us if you want to emulate Xbox 360 and PS3. And of course the 6800U handheld PCs will play AAA games that little bit better than the Steam Deck too, although the Steam Deck is very well optimised for high-tier titles. All well and good, you might be saying, but weren't these handheld Chinese PCs ridiculously expensive at launch compared to the Steam Deck? Well, yes they were. They were double the price. And a lot of people didn't think that that was worth the investment. Even at the early bird prices, you were looking at $949 for the Neo 2. Admittedly, you could get the Neo Geek for quite a bit less, $749, but that was limited to about 300 units. Really, for the Geek, you were looking at $849, so $150 less than the Neo 2. For reasons that will soon become apparent, just going to translate that into pounds at the time. So for the Neo 2, just over £800 on release in December 2022, and the Geek £620 odd at the very lowest price, if you could get one of those for 300 units. And the consensus in the community was unanimous. Amazing devices, glorious screens, fantastic build quality, great performance, but just too expensive at that price, as you can see from the comments coming up on screen. Likewise, the big reviewers like Retro Game Core and The Forks and ETA Prime were all unanimous in saying there's absolutely no doubt that these Chinese handheld PCs were the real deal, had the power, and were indeed Steam Deck killers. Some people justified buying the GPD Win 4 on the basis that they'd use it as a mini PC at home or on the go, but others were put off by the slightly small 6-inch screen. Then there was the Iron Loki Max, which also sported a 6800U processor and purported to have a price tag of about $700, but suddenly disappeared from view, and now can't be found for love nor money. So where does all this leave us? Where it leaves us is a glorious aftermarket. We said before that the Neo 2 came in at just over £800, about $999 on release, but you can now get one for as low as £300 because the aftermarket prices on these devices have tumbled. And it's not just the Neo 2, the Neo Geek as we saw before, coming in at about £620, can now be had for, well, nearly half that, £320 on eBay. Slightly more in some cases, and slightly less in others. And it doesn't stop there. The GPD Win 4, sure it's the 2023 first release edition, but that's very good, can also now be had for around the £300 mark, or just $400 for our stateside friends. And it goes on. These are not isolated incidents. 1X player for £400, slightly on the higher end of our price spectrum here. But then you've got the AOK Zoe, one we haven't mentioned yet, but with a huge 8-inch screen, also going for under £400. And in the States you can pick that up for $460. So you can see the aftermarket for these superb 6800U handheld PCs out of China is truly spectacular. You're getting one for half the price of its original retail value, and one that's about the same price as an admittedly new Steam Deck, as you can see from these current prices on the Valve store. But there is of course a trade-off. The Steam Deck may not be as powerful as the 6800U handheld PCs, but if you're buying a new Steam Deck, it will of course be under warranty, and customer services at Valve, while not perfect, will almost certainly be better than those Chinese companies where the customer service is largely non-existent. It is risky buying anything on the aftermarket, but given the improved performance over the Steam Deck and the parity in price, I think a lot of people will now think that it's worth taking the plunge and getting one of these lovely 6800U handheld PCs. But these are not your only options. Enter the Asus ROG Ally. More powerful than the Steam Deck, even more powerful than the 6800Us, and now also on the aftermarket at a glorious price of around £300, $400. And when all's said and done, at this price point, for price to performance, the Asus ROG Ally is our pick. You'll definitely want the Z1 Extreme version, but beware, because there are issues with the micro SD card reader overheating if you pump up the TDP too high. So, buying an Ally on the aftermarket also comes with a big risk. You might get one with a fried SD card reader, or you might fry it yourself. And yet if you're like us and you don't want to pile loads of games onto your machine, and you mostly want to use it for emulating Xbox 360 and PS3 games, then you can just use the internal memory. Don't use the SD card reader at all. And if you want to go down that route, consider picking one up for super cheap that won't actually read SD cards at all if you don't need to use the SD card reader. Is all this worth the risk when you can just get a refurbished Steam Deck for £249, just over $300? Well, maybe, because even then the refurbished Steam Decks do have some light bleed sometimes. So really there is no absolutely right answer. You can weigh up the pros and cons and decide for yourself, but there's no denying that what's glorious is that the prices are tumbling on the aftermarket, and we've made our pick. It's going to be a ROG Ally for us. Have you made your pick? If you have, please let us know in the comments below. Do tell us your experiences with these handheld PCs at good price points. We'd love to know. And if you've done well for yourself, then give yourself a hearty pat on the back. Take care, please stay tuned for more, and please do subscribe as it really helps us. All the best, and happy handheld gaming.